This is, of course, Janette again, and we're going to be talking about Moses again. This is our fourth talk, and I think we're going to see at this talk, remember when I had mentioned that he had a certain trait that colored his whole life, as we do too with ours. His caring for people and his taking care of people. So this is our fourth talk, and if you remember, we left poor Moses sitting by a well after he traipsed all of that way to Midian. I looked up because I was kind of curious, just how far is it to Midian? And he didn't go by a truck. He didn't go by any kind of vehicle. I don't think he even had camel or donkey. It was 700 miles from Egypt to Midian. And it said if you were going 50 miles an hour in a vehicle, it would take you 215 hours to get there. So this is where he went. This is where he ran to. And if you recall, because he was going to be killed. Because why? Because he had killed somebody. And so we're going to see him sitting by the well, exhausted, I'm sure. Can you imagine? Today's a great day here in Wisconsin, and the sun is out. And I couldn't help but think, I hope it was a nice weather for Moses, and I hope it wasn't too hot. That's a hard saying to say when you're from Wisconsin. So we're going to see him sitting by the well. And this is Exodus chapter 2, verse 15. And now let's go to verse 16. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. The shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. Now what does that remind you of? That was why, remember, Moses murdered somebody because someone was being mean to one of his people? He tends, I think, to have a real caring about people not being abused, people not being mistreated, Moses. And he suddenly reacts. And if you've heard me teach it all, you know I feel there's a real difference between action and reaction. But sometimes it's okay to react. Opposition and action causes for a reaction. He saved those daughters so that they could water their flock. And so when the daughters came home, this is verse 18, to their father, he said, "How is it that you have come home so soon today?" They said, "An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds and even drew water for us and watered the flock." Now they thought Moses was an Egyptian because he was dressed like an Egyptian. And then the father said, "Where is he? Why have you left the man? Call him that he can eat bread." And Moses was content then. Okay, here is Moses, starting out in the palace and sitting by a well and serving other people, watering the flock of somebody else to save them. Just when people think that God has forgotten all about you, and I'm sure Moses must have felt that. There he was, he traipsed all that way to Midian. I don't know how he did it or how long it took him. He must have felt very deserted. But then he did what came naturally to him. He rescued the daughters. And I feel that that's a lesson that we can maybe pick up, that we should do what's very natural for us to do. That I might do that you wouldn't do, but you would do that I wouldn't naturally do. And I talked about that at one talk. Sometimes, though, we stop doing what is very natural to us because other people are not doing it. Other people are not doing it because you have got that job to do. Other people didn't help the daughters. Moses did, because it came very naturally for him to do it. And so he went and he ate. And Moses then was content to dwell with the man, and the man gave Moses one of his daughters, Zipporah. as a wife. And she gave birth to a son, and he called his name Grisham, for he said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land. To me, that's very telling that Moses felt like he was a stranger in a strange land. And we will find that Moses was there for 40 years. 40 years. He was 40 years old probably when he went, and he stayed there for 40 years. Think of the time that it took. Think of the times that we have thought, this is taking too much time. God must have forgotten. God has nothing in my life. God is not going to solve the problem because it's too long. There is Moses. God sent Moses to Midian. Just as surely as God had him write the first 5 books of the Bible, because it was necessary to fulfill God's plan. So while in Egypt, Moses was very important, had a lot of prestige. While in Midian, he wasn't much. He was a shepherd. So after 40 years in the palace, God had another 40 years planned for Moses. This is prior to him being, by the way, you do remember, a baby that was put in the Nile. He must not have had a chance to have an important life. He had too many things against him. Do you sometimes feel that way about you? Boy, you have a lot of things against you. You couldn't have anything with real purpose to be doing. Moses, 40 years in Midian, after 40 years in the palace. I'm in verse 23 now. During those many years, the king of Egypt died. And the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God. And God heard their groaning. And God remembered his covenant with Abraham and Isaac and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. God knows when we groan. He knows that when we are hurting. He hears us. So, there was Moses in Midian, working hard, by the way, as a shepherd. It was a work time for Moses. Those 40 years were not idle that he sat around doing nothing. Sometimes those spaces of time that we have are really hard work times for us. Doing what maybe doesn't come completely natural to us. He had never worked for her so hard. See, but God was training him, was shaping him for what he had to do. And that's what God does with us. When he was in Egypt, he was somebody. When he was in Midian, he learned to be nobody. So God heard the groaning as he was preparing Moses at the same time. Now, the people in Egypt had no idea, the Israelites in Egypt, what was going on, by the way. They thought all was lost, that they would never get out of the situation they were in. Not knowing, way over 700 miles away, God was preparing this particular man for a particular job in a particular way. And that's how he is with us too. He remembered the covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So not only was God remembering the covenant, and he was going to see it through, even though it was 400 years since then. It must have seemed a very long time to the Israelites. Moses was the shepherd and didn't even have his own sheep, by the way. He was taking care of his father-in-law's sheep. He was getting nowhere fast, he probably thought. Let's look and see what chapter 3 has to say. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And you will find that that mountain or became Mount Sinai later. If you remember anything about Mount Sinai, we'll come to that. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in the flame of fire out of the middle of a bush. Now, it wasn't unusual in those days, and maybe today, for a bush in that heat to just catch on fire, but it burns up. But this particular bush kept burning and never burned up, so it was different. The angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the middle of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. Then Moses did a very important thing. It was the beginning of a beginning for him. And he did not know it. Many times we have beginnings of beginning, and we don't know it. Just by doing the very next thing. Elizabeth Elliot has a saying, just do what's next. And Moses just did that. He did just what's next. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight. Why? The bush is not burned. So he turned aside. He paid attention. He took time. He decided that he wanted to see more. He wanted to know more about why this bush was not burning. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush. God did not speak to Moses until Moses had spent time looking, wondering, interested, considering, curious, until he had those kind of feelings, wondering, the wonder of this bush. Until he turned aside and spent that time, God did not talk to him. There will be times in our lives when we think God is silent and that he's not talking to us. But it's also maybe a time when we haven't taken the time to be curious, to wonder, to be silent, and see what it is. And so God called him by name. Now, God knew who he was. He was important to God. And he called him by name, and he said, Moses, Moses. Now, God called other people by their name twice. He did the same thing to Abraham. Abraham, Abraham. Or Samuel, Samuel. Martha, Martha. Saul, Saul. Sometimes when God wants to get our attention, he will call us by name twice. He will call us twice. Moses, Moses. He said, here I am. Have you said, here I am to God? Have you heard him call you? Have you said, here I am? Now, Moses did not know what he was signing up for. But there are times we don't know what we're signing up for. We're just signing up to do what's next when God tells us. Then he said, then God said, do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place of which you are standing is holy ground. So God told him to do two things. Don't come near and take your shoes off, because this is holy ground. Sometimes there are conditions we have to meet. And Moses was very ready to meet those conditions because he was so curious. Are you ready to meet the conditions that God might have placed on you? Because you're wondering about the wonder of God and the wonder he has in your life. And he said, God said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. You will find in Numbers that Moses is called the most humble person in the land. This from someone who grew up in the palace, who was really the top of the mountain, and now he was the most humble person in the land. He hid his face. He didn't think he was worthy to look at God. God has spent 40 years to make him humble. Humbleness is very important, I think, for a Christian, and God demands that of us. That we don't think that somehow we're not worthy, but we're very capable because God is, and we'll see God telling Moses that I will be with you, that we're very capable of doing much more than we had ever anticipated that we would do. And so we're going to leave Moses with his face hidden right now. And that's all for today. The number 4 talk on Moses. You have a good day. Bye-bye.